Joining us live with more is Natasha Robinson, the health editor at the Australian newspaper. Natasha, good to see you. What do the studies actually tell us about how quickly immunity wanes and when the ideal time is to get that booster shot?
Yeah, well, the studies indicate that immunity begins to wane from around about 3 months after the initial 2 doses of vaccine. And there's been various sort of findings in the studies, but some of the studies indicate that, that efficacy or protection from symptomatic infection declines to around about half of what it was initially after 6 months after vaccination. So there is really strong evidence that immunity does wane over time, but it's quite, when you're talking about immunity, you can talk about a number of different aspects of immunity, so that even though you have a diminished level of antibodies, you may still have, or in fact there's very good evidence to show that you do still have a sufficient level of antibodies to protect you from severe disease even more than 6 months after vaccination. So your antibody levels may not be enough to protect you as well as they did initially from catching the disease, having symptomatic infection. But in terms of severe disease, the immunity does hold up well over time. It does diminish somewhat after 6 months, and that's why the government's keen to roll out the booster program, and in fact will be one of the only countries in the world, alongside Israel, that has rolled out a booster program to the general population at this stage. Most other countries are giving it to elderly people and doing it in a more targeted fashion initially.
Australia's chosen the Fisa vaccine as the booster of choice. Why is that, and what does it mean for people who are sitting at home thinking, well, I had the AstraZeneca the first time around, is it good for me to mix and match vaccines?
Yeah, well, there's been quite a few studies done on mix and matching vaccines, and very good evidence has built up that boosting with an mRNA vaccine after the AstraZeneca shot provides a very high level of antibodies, as does boosting with a third shot of Pfizer after you've had 2 initial doses of Pfizer. In terms of using the AstraZeneca as a booster, that's been completely ruled out and has been shown not to be effective, but also there's a potential issue there with developing autoantibodies to the viral vector, which is the method that AstraZeneca vaccine is delivered in the body. So that's completely off the table. In terms of why we're using Pfizer as a booster shot, we'll also be using Moderna. It's because of that good evidence showing the mRNA vaccines are the best to use as a booster, but also we've just purchased so much of the Pfizer vaccine. So we've got about 85 million doses ready to go as boosters. And we've also purchased some of the Moderna vaccine as well. And it's possible down the track that the Novavax vaccine might be used as a booster, but I'm not sure that there's sort of evidence that has accumulated at this stage in terms of using a protein-based vaccine like Novavax to boost. So that's certainly a long way down the track, and that'll be a vaccine in reserve. But Pfizer will provide the majority of the booster shots for the country.
After that FDA announcement overnight about using the Pfizer vaccine for kids aged 5 to 11 in the US, you'd think that the rollout here wouldn't seem too far away in terms of that age cohort in Australia. Is there still much debate within the medical community about the risks versus the benefits of vaccinating that younger cohort, considering we know generally younger kids only do get very mild symptoms?
I don't know if you would characterise it as a really active debate. There's certainly a level of debate in the medical community around how vulnerable children are to COVID-19. I think Professor Fiona Russell, one of the most prominent paediatric physicians in Australia, is very cautious about a vaccine for 5 to 12-year-olds. She wants to look very carefully at the safety data around it. And that's exactly what the TGA is doing. But I certainly wouldn't characterise her as not being in support of vaccination. I think there's a real consensus that vaccinating 5 to 12-year-olds is a positive step and inevitable in Australia. But there is a level of concern, and most particularly with the Therapeutic Goods Administration, to make sure that they have really analysed the safety data, and they've indicated that they're looking even more carefully at the safety data for kids than they did, which was very thorough for the general population. So in terms of when we might expect those vaccines to be available, Professor John Skerritt, the head of TGA, indicated today that we may see an approval by the end of November. So certainly we may see children being vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccines well before Christmas, which is really positive development.
Yeah, and ready for term 1 next year. Natasha Robinson, appreciate your analysis. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ash.